It's awkward.
All right, welcome back to Equal Time Soccer. I'm Matt Privratsky alongside Mark, and we have a big timer here with us today. Clare Gagne, star goalkeeper of the UNC Tarheels, former longtime star up at Brown. Clare, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Well, you have been absolutely crushing it. You're coming off a 3-0 win over Virginia, staying unbeaten in ACC play. First of all, you spent all those years up in Brown, a really successful Brown squad up in the Ivy League. But what's it been like now being at UNC and just being on this hot streak? You're just clean sheeting it up.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean it's been incredible. It's like such an incredible opportunity to be able to continue to push my level and play with such incredible athletes and people. So I think my first couple of months have just been great. I feel like every day I go to training and I get a little bit better, and all credit to my backline as well. Like they're an incredible group of people and athletes. So I think like all the clean sheets, that's not a one person deal at all. And we did actually just get two goals scored on us, so it is
Sure.
a little bit of a roller coaster. But I think that's like credit to our back line and that we're growing, and every game we get better, every practice we get better. So it's exciting to see where we'll go as well.
Well, and we're not going to pretend, Mark and I are not going to pretend we know everything about goalkeeping. But one thing we do know is there's keepers can have very different styles of how they like to play. If you like to play with the ball at your feet, if you like to be aggressive off your line. If folks who haven't watched, a ton of your game just because you're playing out east or, haven't been playing at home a ton, if equal time fans haven't seen you play, how would you describe your game as a keeper and like the strengths you like to bring and how you like to contribute from the net?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing that people would probably say if they watched one of my games live is that I'm very vocal. Um, I have a very loud voice and I do use it. And I think that is one of the strengths of my game, but it is something that I probably makes it a little unique. I think in terms of like tactical, technical, I do play pretty aggressively off my line. I tend to try and come out on a lot of through balls and balls on the ground, balls in the air, things like that. And then something that I continue to grow into, like with a very technical team, is playing with my feet. I'm
Mm-hmm.
very comfortable with it, but I think it's just something here that we really expect out of our back line and out of our goalkeepers. So yeah, it's just been a really cool experience to be able to kind of like build that trust with we've been playing three back, four back, like build that trust with the different personnel that I'm working with, and kind of like figure out what everyone's strengths are so that we can each play to each other's strengths. And I think playing out of the back and building up is one of those strengths for us for sure.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about building that relationship with those teammates. You've had sort of a funny start stop combination with fellow Minnesotan Maddie Deline, who obviously you start the fall season with, but then she heads off to the U20 World
Mhm.
Cup and then comes back and, gets an assist all of, seconds onto the field, comes in and drops an assist,
Yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
because all Maddie does is shred. But for you, you've been playing D1 at a high level forever. You've played with so many good players. This is your first chance, I believe, getting to play with fellow Minnesotan Maddie Deline. But what have you seen from her already in your short time as someone who's really played with a lot of other high level attackers?
Yeah, oh my goodness. I think, well, first of all, I'm so proud of her. Like watching her at the World Cup was just incredible. And she's an incredible person, an incredible player. So it's been so exciting to kind of like recognize that connection, as like we already knew it because we both come from MTA, obviously. Like we played
Yeah.
together briefly in the past, but to be able to continue to build that's really exciting for me. And I'm grateful like in my last year to be able to play with her.
Hmm.
But yeah, she as a player is just someone who is so driven. And like when you watch her defend in practice, like yesterday we were doing like kind of like a counterattack drill, and she was always the first person defending. She's like so fast, not only in her attack but also in her defense. So I think
Hmm.
that's something that makes her like such a game changer when she comes in, because she can like force those quick turnovers and then immediately go to goal. So I think she's just such a threat up top to have that presence and that energy both on offense and on defense. And then she's just such a leader on our team as well. She's got some like amazing energy regardless of whether she's on or off the field. Like she has those incredible
Hmm.
relationships with everyone else on the team as well. So I think her presence is really exciting, and I'm so glad that she's back. But I was so proud of her as well. So
Did you
Yeah.
guys do some watch parties for those
oh
games or
my
what?
goodness, yes, it was so exciting, and she had all of those like last minute goals. It was
Yeah.
incredible, exciting to
I
watch. Yeah.
I'm a big basketball fan, and this stat is like not anything soccer people talk about. But like if there was on off stats for soccer players, Maddie would be like the ultimate on
Plus
off
minus.
like plus minus, because every time she came on, like it's so funny too, because I flew to the Dominican to watch the qualifying tournament and saw her in person, and it's so crazy the difference in what those tournaments were for her. At the CONCACAF tournament, she played 90 minutes, I think like 4 games straight in tournament play in the Dominican Republic, which is sort of just like nuts.
Yeah.
It's sort of insane actually. And then her role completely flips at the World Cup, where she's off the bench every single game, but still equally as impactful in such a different role. You know, it shows you just how lethal she is to just come on and be like, oh, minute 1, I'm jumping in, running down line, just getting dangerous. Yeah, it's just,
yes, of course. Yeah, for sure.
It's nuts. Well, I'm curious too, you know, when you decide to transfer for your final grad year, you know, you're in this sort of unique era, this unique COVID era where you get that 5th year. And what went into that decision in terms of, okay, if I know I want to transfer, then where are the types of places I would want to go? Because you're already coming from a really strong program. So I'm assuming if you're going to transfer, it's going to be really to get a really specific other experience that, you know, Brown offers so many things. So I'm sure there was sort of certain things you wanted in that 5th year if you're going to go through the whole rigmarole of going into the portal. So what were some of those types of things or types of programs you were looking at?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that decision to transfer really wasn't something I was even thinking about in my last season at Brown. I think that as a player, and I think it probably leads well into the fact that I'm a goalkeeper, I think these two things are kind of like, I have to have both, is that I stay like very present in the moment in my season. So I didn't even make that decision to take my 5th year to transfer to do any of that stuff until after we had finished. So I think once I had decided, or once I had finished, I was like, okay, I don't want to be done. Like that was really sad. I need to keep going. So I think like once I made that decision, I was like, okay, I'm going to put my name in the transfer portal, not necessarily because I feel like I'm ready to leave Brown as a program or a school, but because I've already committed to finishing my undergrad at Brown in May. So in the Ivy League, you can't take a 5th year and play as a master's student. So I would have had to take the spring off and then play my last season as an undergrad still.
Yeah,
so,
that would have been insane.
It's the only conference that does that, right? I mean, like in basketball and stuff, these other programs have like really gotten a score because people can't stay even if they want to stay. So that's an Ivy League thing. It's a academic purity thing.
So Kia's just like hanging out being like, oh great, I have to lose this keeper. What a fun way to set this up, Ivy League.
Well, I think what's really great about Brown as well is that like we did have so much depth, especially in our keeper unit. Like I played with some incredible keepers, and I like the community and the camaraderie we built was something that I'm really grateful for. So I think like in that moment, they must have been very confident in what they had coming, because I was confident in what they had coming, and I was competing with them every single day. So I think that's something that's really special about Brown. But in that regard of like moving on to the next step, I think I felt really well prepared for wherever my journey would take me, just because of the coaching I got at Brown and playing under Kia and Andre and like some phenomenal coaches. So I think in making that decision, I was like, whatever happens when I put my name in the transfer portal. It's very hectic, like lots of communications and like lots of things to figure out in your senior spring. But
you had to have been, you're like every single program like the reason the portal is so like, you are literally built for what coaches want in the program. Like, oh, what? Like a tailor-made, insanely high-level keeper we can just drop into our like, I can't imagine how many people were, but like how many random ass emails. Like, did you do the thing? There's very, very few, like the portal is very, like it's much simpler than people think. Like it just shows like a name and says like, do you want to be contacted or not? And blah, blah, blah. Like there's very few pieces of information in the literal portal. But were you getting like barrage? Did you say, no, I'm just going to reach out to people? Like what was that recruitment like once you were in there?
Yeah. Well, it was, first of all, it was funny because I was like, oh my goodness, like recruiting again. Like, I don't want to do this again. Like, I was like, I already did this once. It wasn't fun the first time. But I think like, so there is very little information. So when you first put your name in, you do kind of have those two paths where you can either reach out to coaches or they can reach out to you. I was like, had really no idea what the portal was going to entail. Like I didn't know what kind of interest I was going to get. I didn't expect this. I'll be completely honest. I was like, one of my goals was to just find a program that also had like an MPH program, a Master's of Public Health, that was competitive and would be a good fit as well. So that was one of the things I was looking for, and I made a list of schools that I thought kind of like intersected the competitive soccer and the competitive MPH program.
Go ahead and list every single one of those schools for us, Claire.
Okay, well, no. It was so I think it was like
Duke,
a lot of
NC State, Clemson.
Well, it's also there's the important thing of like, if you have a keeper that's achieving in your program and you have someone who's been there for a couple years, like you don't need another keeper. And like even it like doesn't matter if like we could come and compete or like it could like raise the level. Like if you have a keeper, you have a keeper. And so I think that like really narrows the list down, because it happens. It just, and especially with that like 5th year transfer, like the COVID year, like a lot of programs did have a keeper that they were like happy with and that they trusted. So I think that narrowed the list as well. And then from there, Kia was very helpful in kind of like helping me reach out to those coaches and making that first point of contact. And then coaches would also reach out to me directly or reach out through Kia. And what's interesting about the soccer world is that it is very small. So a lot of them already know each other, and it's just like a quick phone call or like a, hey, like I know this coach is interested in connecting or things like that. And then from there, those conversations start to narrow into like, do they have the program that I'm interested in? What is my role on the team going to look like? And conversations like that really start to like focus in on what the actual experience is going to be like. And then, and then with UNC, those things just started to line up more and more. And as I was trying to make that final decision, I was like, how much out of my comfort zone do I want to push myself in my 5th year? And I think like at the time that I ended my season at Brown, I wasn't even sure that I wanted to continue playing soccer, because I was just like, I had a lot of things academically and professionally that I was excited about, and I love soccer, but I just wasn't sure. So I think like as the process went on and I started to learn about those other opportunities, I just started to miss soccer more and more and miss having that team environment. So when I got in contact with UNC and that started to happen, I was like, okay, like this is it. I'm going to just go full force for my 5th year. And I'm so glad I did, because I think like it's just continuing to allow me to fall in love with soccer over and over and over again every day at training. So I think it was a great decision. I'm very happy with it.
Well, and how many, and you know, you mentioned sort of having your list, and I'm sure that was sort of the starting point, and then you talk about narrowing it down. By the time you were really sort of seriously considering UNC, how many programs were at that phase of like, okay, I actually could maybe say yes or whatever? Like, you know, did you narrow it down to, were there like 5 places you were legitimately considering, or 2, or just 1? Or, you know, like how much did you have, by the time you were talking to coaches, did it narrow super quickly all the way down? Or did you have to do a little bit of like actually do some visits or actually do some, you know, some of that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, because I think in my undergrad, I think it just kind of like went directly into Brown. Like all roads led to Brown for me in undergrad. And like I like was talking to other schools, but Brown just felt like the best fit for sure. And I think in terms of grad school, that felt a lot wider. And I was like, maybe it's because I had those 4 years of experience in college and in college soccer, and I knew more specifically what I was looking for, and I knew which schools would better fit that idea. But I think by the end, it was like maybe 3 or 4 schools that were at the top of my list, and all of them were very close. And it was a really difficult decision at that point to be like, these are the things I'm giving up. These are the things that I'm choosing. And I think when I look back on it, I'm like, okay, like I got everything that was on my list in terms of like athletics, academics. Like I'm really happy with that. But I think also there were programs where I knew for sure that I would be playing, or I knew that there were opportunities to go in and have that spot without really having to like fight for it or compete for it. And that's just not really in my DNA. Like I wasn't the starter at Brown for all 4 years. So I think like choosing that like scarier option, which like required me to come in and like really fight for that spot against some really, really great goalkeepers, is something that I'm glad I did, because I think it makes me better every single day. But that was a huge part of the decision as well, in terms of like, I could go somewhere for my 5th year and I could know no one on the team and end up like sitting on the bench, and hopefully that would still be a good experience and a learning experience, but it could be the reality of what I'm choosing. So I think that also played into it in the end as well.
Well, and you talk about that comparison of going through a quote unquote recruitment after you've had the 4 years of college, let alone being 4 years older or 5 years older, you know, but how different it felt to you, how much more informed you felt. Because we try and talk about the recruiting process on here just because I personally think elements of it are really under discussed, like the fact that these decisions have to be made by like 16 and 17-year-olds, the fact that there's all this built-in pressure that players have of like, oh, well, my friend went Power 5, so if I don't go Power 5, or like, oh, well, if I don't go D1, then you know, I'm an MTA player, so if I don't go D1, I'm a failure. And and all this mental and emotional pressure that players deal with is just so intense, and it's so crazy. And then all of a sudden you throw that on like a literal 17-year-old or 16-year-old, and they're supposed to make like one of the biggest decisions of their life, and they're choosing a program based on, well, in this like pressure chamber. For you, you know, do you think about that, of like how insane it is to be like, you know, basically like almost kids are having to make these like crazy decisions? And it's like people choose colleges for any number of reasons. Like we chose colleges for Mark and I, you know, went to the school we went to for like random reasons and ended up being a perfect fit, but it's not like we were sophisticated decision makers. But do you think about that, of like how crazy it is for in that undergrad recruitment process? Of, you said like for you it just like narrowed to Brown, and so I'm sure you had your reasons, and Brown is a great team and a great school, so no regrets. But do you think about that in terms of how wild it is for like teenagers to go through that kind of process during that undergrad recruitment?
Oh my goodness, I think about it frequently. I like whenever a younger player is asking for advice or anything like that, like that's the first thing that crosses my mind, is like, this is a big decision. And I'm so glad that the recruiting process has shifted a little bit later. Like when we were going through it, my class, like there were people committing to college in like 8th grade, freshman year. And that is like wild to me. And a lot of those people were very confident and happy with their decisions, even throughout their 4 years. But I think it's just one of those things that like, you don't know how much you don't know until you're in college and you're experiencing those things. And I think, it's just a like ridiculous thing to think about, is like us making those decisions so young. Because I think as I was making that decision again 4 years later, I was like, wow, like I'm so lucky that this works out, but I really had no idea what I was picking. Like I look back and I'm like, wow, Brown was like actually, I think such a perfect fit for me, but how would I have known that? Because the things that were important to me at Brown, I didn't even consider when I was in my recruiting process. So I think it's just such a crazy journey to go through as like a recruited athlete and then an athlete in college, for sure.
Nice for you in terms of this recent move. It definitely helped, probably in a way, joking about the uniqueness of the Ivy League policy. But it definitely helps that you weren't leaving because you were choosing that you didn't want to be there. And so the coach didn't have to feel like they were being burned by you. They could be supportive. And so, I mean, gosh, that would help a lot more if other coaches are asking about Claire and they don't have like a bitterness in them about, you know, how it ended. So I'm guessing that maybe helped too, getting a nice little reference. You know, everyone tries to leave the job nice so you can get, you know, a reference from the boss.
Absolutely.
And so talk about the difference, right? So I want to ask a little bit more about Brown. You were there for a long time, and UNC also, by the way, very good academic school. Just by contrast, it's kind of like the brand of the schools obviously are what they are. UNC has a lot of sports focus with the Jordan brand and just a lot of high level athletics. How do you compare the two? Because they must be different. I was looking at kind of pictures of Brown, and I was seeing you and getting like a white letter sweater, and then I was contrasting it with like going to like UNC, like Nike or Jordan money, and I was just, it must be different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the one big difference is definitely the gear. The white Nike sweater, I love it dearly, but it is not the most stylish. But I think like one of my big takeaways, and maybe this is just in how like I've framed my 5th year in my mind or my perspective on it, but it is very, very athletics focused. And I think for the people that choose to come here for undergrad, like that is what they're pursuing. And a lot of them know that that's what they're going to get. So I think that definitely shifts things, because everyone who comes here is the best player from their club, is the best player from their state. So I think that really shifts the dynamics on the team in terms of like how people are coming into that team space. Like at Brown, we worked a lot on building confidence in our younger players and kind of like building that team culture that was like very focused on uplifting each other. And I think here there is more of a focus on, I guess, accountability and kind of like learning to work together as a team. And
the cauldron, baby.
The cauldron, yeah, the competitive cauldron, which has also been very, very interesting, because I think like everyone comes here ready to compete. Like that's part of what you're recruited on. So I think there's a different mindset about that here, which I really appreciate. Like I think that it really is helping everyone here grow. And I think that because everyone's so bought into that competitive mindset, it's something that really allows us to get to that next level. And at Brown, I think there was definitely that competitive mindset and that competitive like interest in growth, but it's just something that's a little bit younger. Like Kia's program is younger in general compared to Anson's program, which is now David's program. So I think like there's a whole history there that we can kind of like build off of and continue to have confidence in. And at Brown, that confidence was still being built. Like we had a great 4 years, and they're like really starting to gain momentum this year as well. But I think those things are things that like you really have to put more intention into when you're in a program like Brown, because you're recruiting people who are very high academic achieving, very high athletic achieving, but really want to excel at both. So it's like one of those things where you have to have people bought into that that like competitive culture at Brown. And when you come to UNC, a lot of people are already bought into that and are very focused on soccer, and soccer is what they see for their career. So I think there's just a different like way of imagining that in both of those circumstances. And I think, to be honest, it results in a pretty similar outcome. It's just kind of like the process that you're taking to get there, and kind of like how, like for Kia and for Damon, like how you're coaching people to get to that point, and for like us as upperclassmen, like how you're supporting the underclassmen to get to those points.
Do you think you were better prepared to, and for people who don't know, I think most people who watch these type of shows with us probably do know, but the UNC, it's a good sports school overall, but like women's soccer is kind of one of one. It's kind of a one of one of any college program. I'm sure there's other sports I'm unaware of but the number of titles over the aggregate of the years is like, is that a number that's drilled into you, Claire? Do you know how many national titles you guys have? It's over 20. Isn't it like, it's like almost half of them?
22 potentially.
It's a crazy. I remember when I watched the documentary. It was a few years back, but it was like they had more than half. Of them. It's crazy. So Brown, like we said, honestly, epically successful in the Ivy League, title after title after title. So maybe one of the few places you could go and just immediately be a little bit shocked by comparison is walking by all the national trophies, or whatever.
Yeah, for sure.
Fair enough. What are your favorite memories at Brown? Like we said, a really winning program. You had to work your way into it. Like you didn't get to just play, right away. You got your opportunities. And then you became a really strong standout last year, especially. But so like, what are your favorite memories thinking back to Providence?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, there are so many, so it's hard to narrow it down. I think when I look back on like my happiest memories, a lot of those are just times around the team that are spontaneous, and you don't really think about like times on the bus or times in the locker room. And then I think like some of those really exciting moments were obviously like winning those titles back to back to back. I think every year it got more exciting, and every year I felt like there was a little more like pressure, a little bit more like urgency, because I was getting older and I was like, oh, like I can only do this so many more times. So I think it was really exciting to do that with everyone. And I'm grateful that like we had a lot of really great players come back my senior year, so we got to do it again. And I think like it kind of delayed a rebuilding year by 1 year, and they're definitely in a rebuilding year this year, but in a way that's like very exciting because they're rebuilding really fast, and it's really exciting to see a lot of those younger players kind of like take more leadership roles, and so that's exciting to watch. But I guess I think also in terms of like moments that I reflect on, and I don't necessarily know that they're my like favorite memories, but they're really important memories to me, would be some of those moments where I was on the bench with my teammates, or I hadn't played a game in like a while because I had been on the bench for 2 years. Like things like that, I think are really important to me in terms of my development as a player and as a leader. And I think kind of being able to see from both sides in terms of like what it's like to be a player on the bench and what it's like to be a starter are really important to me and how I come into every team I'm on now and every like my senior year, for example. And I think those experiences and those like hardships of like, okay, trying to get through this because I was like third string at times. I like wouldn't make the travel roster, and then I'm starting my senior year. And I think like those experiences really allowed me to become the player I am because first of all, like once like when I came in here, there was a really like high urgency for me to prove myself and to kind of like make an impact right away. And I think once I had made that impact, the urgency doesn't stop for me because I've started seasons and lost my spot. I've not started a season and gained my spot. So I think as a goalkeeper, it's really just one of those things where I know that I have to keep performing, and that can be really nerve-wracking, but it's also a privilege. And that ability to kind of like come into that space every day and know that I'm competing for something and know what it's like to lose that something, but also the value I can bring, even if I'm not on the field, was really important to me. So I think those memories at Brown are the memories that allowed me to grow the most. And then there are so many of them that are just so happy being around my team and celebrating, or I think also just like growing as a person with my team. I think when you get to your senior year and you look back after 4 years and you look at all the people around you, you're like, oh my goodness, like we all grew so much as a community. And I think that's just a really exciting thing to experience because you're like, I'm so proud of all the people around me and I'm so proud of myself for how much I grew and how much I changed. So I think those are some of my favorite for sure.
Well, and you talk about the going through the experience of being like a third string keeper to being a starter. We really try to elevate in general, like all the emotional, mental pressure on women's college soccer players, just how much you all deal with. And we talk about that generally. The truth is it's probably even leveled up for keepers because of how isolating and individualized and like, if you're a great winger that's not starting, you still might be able to play outside back or play somewhere else. It's like if you're a keeper, like you have to win that spot. I'm also curious because you mentioned the buses. I'm really curious because you're playing at UNC in this absurd mega conference era. Like there's almost no bigger difference, I would guess, than like the Ivy League footprint to like the new modern ACC footprint. Like the Ivy League actually probably has one of the like quote unquote best or easiest or like most contiguous like travel compared to almost anyone else, I would imagine. Like I would assume if we drew our maps of like every single conference, the Ivy might be the most condensed. Has that been different? Like you literally have coast to coast shit in the ACC now. Like has that felt different for you as a player in terms of, oh, like recovering from a literal bi-coastal flight is different than like a bus ride from Providence to New York or whatever?
Well, I think, okay, one important thing to note, I think, is that
maybe the charter,
our bi-coastal flight is coming up. So
they're going to the Bay soon. It's Berkeley and Stanford.
Yes.
Do you guys charter for all those flights though?
We don't. They did last year, but we don't this year.
Okay, so that's only in the SEC. I think there's teams in the SEC where every flight is a charter.
For sure. And I know that's been the case in this program in the past, but I think just in terms of like roster size and how many new players we have, it doesn't make sense this year. But I think in terms of travel, it is very different. And I think one of the big things is that we're flying everywhere. I think in the Ivy League, like the travel days are pretty terrible because you have like 6-hour bus rides to Cornell and to like Ithaca, New York, and you're like, oh my god, like I have homework, this sucks. But I think it's a little bit different in that like here I think that it's maybe I've just like shifted my mindset, like I said, but I think I'm like accepting that it's okay for me to just be like, okay, it's a travel day, I'm not gonna do my work today, which is not good because my academic program is difficult and very competitive. So I think I need to log in like a little bit more. But I think in terms of like flights, there's a level of like we've traveled to Colorado and there are just a lot of resources here in terms of like sports science and nutrition that really bolster your experience and give you the tools to be successful. And that doesn't mean that it's not a grind. I know that like the field players were really on the struggle bus in terms of altitude in Colorado, and it was like exciting to be able to like grind out a win in those conditions. But I think those are things that as you kind of like continue to grow in your sport, like you just kind of take those on the chin, and you really learn to adapt and work with what you have, and just kind of be like, okay, like we get the opportunity to go travel to California, New York, like we get these opportunities to travel and play our sport. So despite the fact that it might be challenging, or despite the fact that it's a difficult plane ride, or it's a long plane ride, like we still get to do that. And I think kind of taking that grateful mindset is something that really helps in those situations, and kind of like regrounds you and your goals, and what your next steps are in terms of like playing the game, getting the job done, and then going home and recovering from there.
So one more question about the contrast, because I wanted to ask, I bet you dealt with this. Like I made the comment about the white letter sweater at Dartmouth. The seniors, by the way, get a white sweater. The freshmen get a brown one, right? I love that kind of tradition stuff, though. That is kind of fun. But joking about maybe the cliche or like stereotypes of an Ivy League school. Brown is one of the oldest colleges in the country. I learned on Wikipedia before interviewing you. But what some of the cliches are probably really just made up, and not true. Which ones can you say, when you were hearing about Brown and you started going there, which ones did you find to be maybe true? Maybe like, I don't know, if you ever heard the word cake eater when you were in the suburbs of Minnesota, we like that word, but maybe, if I heard you were committing to Brown, I might've said that in high school. I don't know. But what can you tell us about like misconceptions or how it was when you actually went out there?
Yeah, I think two of the ones that come to mind immediately as things that are true and that I did expect because of what people kind of talked about at Brown. And it might just be because I'm biased, but there is like the cliche that Brown is the happiest Ivy. And I think that is very true. Like I felt very happy in my 4 years, even when I was struggling, and even like when things weren't going my way, or like when like I was having like personal experiences that were tough, like things like that. Like I felt very supported by the community around me, and I felt very much like there was an emphasis on full person development and community at Brown that I was really grateful for, because I don't know how much you guys know about like Brown's grading system.
Which rivals don't do that, Claire? Which
name
schools
them.
do you think?
Name them.
I feel like Princeton, Harvard, Dartmouth, Cornell, all of that.
This is great. This is Mark and I have literally no dog in the Ivy fight, so you can come on here and shit on the whole rest of the Ivy
I would
League.
believe it though. I get that does. That's not surprising to hear though. That just in terms of, especially because I mean, it is like Harvard and Yale. I mean, it is like there's such a brand competitive. It's not about school or anything else. It's just like a brand competition.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would definitely think a school like Brown would be a place where you're still getting really highly motivated and like talented students. Maybe a little less of like the Nepo babies, like getting. I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of a wonderful alum coming to Brown as well.
Some good legacies there too. I'm sure.
Like that's the word I was looking for. But but that's cool to hear that you really. I mean, obviously, you had a positive. Like the culture was
so happiest Ivy. Glad we're getting that out there for all the Brown recruits. Okay.
This does like a foundation.
Okay.
And then I think part of that is that Brown is a very diverse school. So I think in terms of like the people that go there, there's an interest in getting out of your comfort zone and an interest in building diverse communities, which is something that I really felt on the soccer team, and all credit to Kia for recruiting a very diverse team. I think like that was a huge part of my experience and a huge part of my growth as a person and a player, is learning to create a really close team culture with people who come from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I think one of the stereotypes that you would expect to be true about the Ivy League, that, and I can't really speak to all Ivies, but I feel like it would probably be the same, is that like you would expect people who have a lot of money to go to Brown because they can afford it and there are no athletic scholarships. But I think one of the things that I was really grateful for was that there are really robust not academic scholarships, but like the university scholarship for like need-based financial aid is pretty big. So I think like that's one of the things that when I'm talking to people who want to be recruited, some people will completely like cross out the Ivy League because there are no athletic scholarships. And while I think for some people, like it does make sense because it's like it's need based. So like for some families, like depending on the amount of need that the government says you demonstrate, like it can be really hard to like afford that university. But I think for like my one caveat to that is always like definitely do the research first and try and figure out what options are out there, because for me, like there were some years at Brown that it was really affordable just because of like my family's like need-based scholarships. So I think, and like also there were some more supports during COVID as well. So I think like those things at Ivy Leagues can be very good, despite the fact that there are few like athletic there are no athletic scholarships.
Right.
So I think that's one thing that I was surprised by. Like I did expect to be in a lot of debt coming out of college, and well, I may be in some debt. I'm not in as much as I thought. So I'm so grateful to my parents as well for like being a huge part of paying for my college education. And I'm not like, I know that is a huge part of why I am where I am. So I'm definitely grateful for that. But I think also just like kind of like acknowledging that there is a like wider range of accessibility than some people might expect with Ivy Leagues. And while I think that like barriers should and could be reduced to a lower level than what it is right now, there are still opportunities for people that might not think that is an option, or it could be an option.
Well, and I just want to shout out one thing you mentioned as part of that story, the Brown roster. So Brown came and played at the Gophers this year. So folks in Minnesota maybe got a chance to see them. And just want to put a button on one thing you mentioned of like, you know, D1 women's college soccer is like girls soccer in general and club soccer in general in the country is like overly expensive, predominantly suburban, which lends it to being sort of overly white. And so like, you know, even though people think of women's soccer and they see the national team or NWSL and it's like the most diverse, rad, progressive space, and like, you know, the front line for the US women's national team being 3 young like women of color who are just so rad and cool. But the truth is the space in general, like the space Mark and I are in covering this, is like overly white, like overly upper middle class to upper class. And so when you see a team like Brown that's so diverse and they come in led by Kia McNeil, you know, there's not enough women head coaches in the game, very few women of color head coaches in the game. Kia McNeil as a black woman leading Brown, and she's been so unbelievably successful. It really says a lot to folks like us and to people like you who live in this space. That's why it's so meaningful to you, because like the rest of the space does not always feel that way. And so just want to shout out Kia for the leadership of that program and for Brown for that type of a team, because I broadcast a lot of games. We watch a lot of games. We cover a ton of games. You do not see a team that looks like Brown that frequently. You do not see a team led by a head coach like Kia McNeil that frequently. And so that does matter. And folks like us need to sort of name it because it is too rare. And so just want to, I'm so glad you brought it up so we had a chance to name it, because it just is really cool. I mean, for us operating in this space to see a team like that is just really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just such an incredible job by her to create something that's so tight knit, like with so many people from so many different walks of life. And I think like my like we were talking like happiest memories, like my happiest memories are largely tied to the fact that that community was so diverse, like so many like learning experiences, so many opportunities to create that like deeper level of trust and understanding because we had to have difficult conversations. Like I think something that was often like glanced over at this level and this like in this like community, like you were saying, is that like those conversations need to be had. Like we need to talk about race, we need to talk about identity, because otherwise like you just ignore those things if you're in a space that's predominantly white, predominantly straight. And I think like being in a space like Brown, like the Brown women's soccer team, where it's not like where we have a lot of people who are like coming from different spaces, we have a lot of queer people, we have a lot of people of color, like that is something so special because those things are vocalized more openly and those things are talked about more frequently. And I think like that then leads you to have those deeper friendships because you're having those conversations and because you have this foundational trust of like, I respect you as a person, and that's like the bottom line. And then from there, like so many incredible things can happen. And you just know that the people around you have your back because you've talked about it and because you know like the broader like systems that are at play and how you can operate within them to best support your teammates and like create that family within your team.
Yeah, 100%.
Wow, nice to hear that. Nice to hear that from you, Claire. Yeah, also, I'm feeling a warm heart in the queer soccer bar that I get to work at because it sounds like you got to stop by when you're back in town. And I did, by the way, just realize for a current spin on it, I realized we have the ACC network here, which I've never had anywhere else. So I realized we can actually tune into UNC Tarheels, so we're gonna find our way to that on the weekend. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Providence. So, I mean, I love it as like an underdog city, right? I'm sure people there have a certain grit to them that it's like, we're not New York, we're not Boston.
yeah.
But I wonder, like, what are your favorite? Did you get into seafood? I mean, when I think about going to I think about you just doing lobsters, and did you pick up any Providence accent on perhaps those local words like I don't know how to say lobster, but you maybe do. Lobster.
Well, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, but I am vegetarian, and I was for all 4 years that I was at Brown.
Right.
So I didn't get into the seafood world, although my roommates and my friends would pretty often go to Seafood Boil, and they had great reviews, so I would recommend.
What would you get? Did you ever go with them and what would you get as your option? Just some corn?
I didn't go. I never went, but I should have gone because I should have just seen if there was
corn on the cob, a biscuit.
Yeah, no, exactly. Corn on the cob. Yeah, but it's actually funny. My dad grew up in Boston area, and my grandma still lives out in Worcester area.
Yeah.
So it's so like she has such a strong Boston accent. So I think what you're looking for is lobster, which is what she would say.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
You just drop the R on every word you say, and it'll be fine. Lobster and ka and things like that.
Yours is pretty. You're pretty mid-Atlantic. You're pretty accent-free. I was gonna ask if you picked up any Providence accent, but you clearly did not. I wonder.
No.
Did you have locals on your team though out there that totally sounded local Providence?
We had a few, but I think Providence in general doesn't have a strong accent. I think the accent you would get in that area is definitely Boston.
Sure.
So we had a few people who would be like saying wicked this, wicked that, and that was kind of a shocker at first. But I will say that I adopted it at times because it's kind of a fun slang to use. So I recommend that one as well.
Well, it's really strong. When Matt and I lived with a guy from Boston, we were interns in DC, and he would be totally. He worked in media too, so he was like totally mid-Atlantic. And then he would get buzzed, and he would start. And someone talked about a cop or something. It'd be like, "Don't talk about cops." And I'm like, "Oh man," it would come up. But then you would kind of match it because it was just kind of funny. Like I don't know, people do Minnesota stuff to us. I mean,
but that's what I'm wondering. You seem like you're not super thick Minnesota accent. I don't think mine is super thick. And then sometimes I'll post a clip from the show, and like random black friends I have will be like, "Oh my god, you have the thickest Minnesota accent in the whole world." Did anyone clown you? Like we talk about the Providence accent, but obviously Minnesota has its own Fargo stereotype. Did you ever get clowned, even though I don't think you sound like you have a thick Minnesota accent?
I think I would often, not often, I would say every once in a while, someone would make fun of the Minnesota accent, despite the fact that they would acknowledge that I don't have it.
Right.
But I think, it's just a fun option to throw in there. But yeah, I think more so we had some players, or we had one player on my team from Chicago, or we had more than one, but one player had a strong Chicago accent, and she would more get the brunt of that. And honestly, it was mostly coming from me. So I think I really avoided the Minnesota accent.
That's great. But yeah, you got a nice mix of it. I mean, you got some good Southern accents on the UNC team.
Actually, you'd be surprised. We don't really. We have like I've heard it in the community a little bit, but it's not that strong on the team. It's not really strong in like Chapel Hill either. So
you got to get in the country sometimes, Although I mean, there's plenty of people in the cities have really thick Minnesota accents. But I mean, you do get it if you go up to the Iron Range and stuff too. But you're an ordained minister. Just got it. What's the story? Was it for a friend's wedding?
Well, that's just my fun. Like, you always have to have a fun fact that you can share when you're asked for a fun fact.
I am too, by the way. I've never used it. I have.
Yeah, no, neither have I. Neither have I. However, just a PSA, like if anyone ever needs to get married,
Okay.
I got you.
So
But yeah,
that's good.
I got ordained online. So
it's the thing where like you just heard, I did it, like you just heard about it and did it for fun. And then someone asked me to really do it. And then and guess what? They got married during COVID. They didn't even tell me that I. But then the more I thought about it, it's kind of a lot of pressure. I was fine. I didn't know.
It is a lot of pressure. I'm not sure if I ever actually want to do it, but I will continue to tell people that I'm an ordained minister. And
so this leads to. I mean, I was going to ask you because I realize now we had a really good answer to a player asking about NIL opportunities. Mm-hmm. So one thing I just want to ask you, like, did it come up at all when you were being recruited? I'm guessing no. NIL is not a big thing in women's soccer, but I am curious. Like, did any of the teams bring up that could be a potential thing?
I think it came up in conversation as more of like a loose, like a hypothetical, like we have like this NIL department or we have these NIL resources. And I think for a lot of like really high level recruits, it's coming up more in terms of like, we have X, Y, and Z, and you will get paid X, Y, and Z. And I think like those were not the conversations I was having, but also not really the information I was looking for. So I think it really depends on what your goals are as an athlete coming into college soccer. The collegiate world and the collegiate athletic world is going to change a lot in the next like 2-3 years. And one of those things is going to be that it's going to be driven heavily by money, I think. So it wasn't really a conversation I had as much, but I do know that it is becoming a larger conversation and a lot of schools are using that in recruiting. So I think it will change the landscape quite a bit. I know it's changing the landscape right now in terms of like some players are decommitting and going to other schools because of those NIL opportunities.
Okay.
So it's really interesting. And it wasn't something that I really had a lot of personal experience with, but it's really interesting just kind of to watch from afar and see where things are going in that realm.
Yeah.
Well, get ready. No, Matt, because there's a wedding event center watching this right now and they're going to hire you. This is how we're merging the thing. They're going to hire, you could be married by an ACC standout goalkeeper, Claire. Who hasn't wanted it?
This is,
no, exactly. I should start it up.
People don't want a traditional pastor or priest as much. Young Gen Z don't care about that. Claire, they have a different type of church. I work in a church here on Sunday morning.
They want an officiant.
Church.
They want an officiant with an Ivy League degree, baby. They want Ivy League educated.
Wow.
This is you mentioned the NIL stuff. It's funny because so much of the money, like the rest of sports, is so dominated on the men's side. Like we haven't really reached like anything remotely close to fairness. A lot of the NIL stuff on the women's side is going to people who are sort of very, very big online, like who have huge online presences. So you are not someone that strikes me as an incredibly online Instagram type person, but because you do see, even like Mark and I joke about it sometimes, we're following these players like these Minnesotans playing around the country, and once in a while I'll randomly see a player's story and like click and I'm like, oh whoa, they have 30,000 Instagram followers. Like you can tell the people who are sort of neck deep in like the Instagram TikTok game, and that you do not strike me as someone who's like neck deep in the Insta world.
I don't have TikTok. So. Maybe Claire's on TikTok. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, you could be very big on TikTok, and Mark and I would not know because we are basically 50-year-olds. So
no, it's really interesting actually. It's kind of funny because when I committed to UNC for my 5th year, I was telling all my friends at Brown who know that I'm not really big on social media. Like I have a like Instagram presence, but not like until this year I was posting like maybe once a year. So I think like I was joking with them that guys, like I'm gonna start my influencer journey. Like I gotta get that bag. Like I need to be like really putting the work in here. So it's like interesting because I think you're right. Like I think the NIL is very tied to your social media presence right now. So I think it's just funny because I was like, should I just like ramp it up and like try and create this presence? But I just don't think that's
it's gonna be
front-facing videos about the lunch you're making. You're out. I mean, it's going to be. There's a formula. Yeah.
It's going to be workout content. It's going to be food content. It's going to be training gear content.
Do you have teammates? You must have teammates with a little bit of that going on. And
For sure. I think that there are definitely some people on the team who have like a bigger following. But I think, and like some people on TikTok, but to be honest, like I don't even think I'm involved enough to know what they're doing with their
but I mean, here's what I'm asking, Claire. It's all the videos of like, especially like in D1 women's basketball, this blew up because there's such big NIL there. I'm thinking more like your teammate comes in and you all get headphones. You know what I mean? They're like, that's because I feel like I've seen that where like everyone gets a new phone. I'm like, damn, all right, Angel Reese, way to go.
Yeah.
That would be ideal for me as well, as if they can find all this NIL deals and then I can just benefit of their team.
So, Maddie Darlene,
Maddie,
I'll be on her.
Maddie, get super into Instagram, like
Claire. So I did want to. When we talked a little bit about you, kind of bouncing into former Minnesota people in college world. Certainly, when you were in academy, you were running into tons of different Minnesota players. I have the list of the 2019 All Metro team here. How many can you name, Claire? It's a first 11. It's made to be just for the balance of the. Just so you know, I'm recognizing a lot of D1 names here. Maybe only one or two I don't immediately know. Yeah.
Okay, 2019. That's my.
So it's a first and second. Yeah, first.
I have the second team as well, but so if you have any, see how many you could name.
Okay.
There's some huge goal scorers. There's 2 or 3 people who are scoring tons of goals.
Okay.
She doesn't need hints. This
is Kayla McNeil.
Yeah.
Kaya Harper.
Yeah, at Minnesota.
She's in my year. Is it just? This is all 4 years. I think
there could be juniors in it as well, but it's mostly seniors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Kaya Harper, Kayla McNeil, Abby Franzen.
Yes.
Sophia Bowman.
Minnesota.
Is Maddie on there? How old is Maddie? No. Okay.
No, Maddie's a sophomore this year. She might have almost made the team though, but
she probably would have. Gosh, this has been a while.
This is great. I love the pressure.
Is this good podcasting? I don't know.
This is good. No, people are here for this. People are here for this for sure.
There's someone I will say.
You can name yourself too. You can name yourself.
Okay.
Well, you're in it. There's someone you're gonna play this year, maybe. Also a transfer.
There's a lot of D1s on here, for sure.
There's an ACC forward you're gonna have to shut out, right? She's ACC. It's ACC.
Yeah.
Am I? Yeah.
We sound so Midwestern. We're trying to guess who's in the ACC.
Well, she was last year too.
Yeah.
Paige Peltier, who's at Notre Dame.
Yeah. How could I forget her?
But then there's a couple of like Caitlin Hansen is at South Dakota State, right? Yeah. Kelsey Callio, NDSU.
Well, this is like a murder. I mean, I'm sure the All Metro team always is, but like Catherine Jones is crushing it for South Dakota State. We got Groutman in the keeper brigade for you, man. Crazy. Jelena Zbilic, go for favorite.
There we go. But so thank you so much for joining us, Claire. For people wanting to follow UNC, like we said, you can come to the Blackheart and we'll find ACC Network for you. And this Thursday, 6 p.m. Central, for most of our people here, that's the time, playing at Louisville. And then the next weekend, you get the trip to California in the ACC. We're dealing with that in the Big Ten too, with the Gophers just came back from LA. Claire, thank you for joining. Do you want any way for people to stay engaged with you on social media or otherwise?
My opportunity to boost my social media. I'm not active on social media, but my handle is Clare Gagne. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
To Claire's family, who's probably watching or listening right now, if you come to the Blackheart, drinks are on us. Mark and I got you. Come watch some games. We got you anytime you come in.
That's true.
I'll let them know.
All the way from Orono. It is a drive. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you guys so much for having me. It was a joy.